Hello everyone, welcome to HIM 216. This is a continuation of the lectures for Chapter 3. In your textbook, please turn to page 49. And on the bottom of page 49, number 6, abbreviations, your textbook talks about the abbreviations NEC and NOS as they're used in the tabular and in the index. In the index, you can see right here we have an example of one NEC here, NEC here. NOS is not used quite as often, and basically it'll say NOS. In the tabular, you see them used the same way. NEC, we have NEC here, and we have NOS here. They mean the same thing, whether they are in the index or in the tabular. And NEC means not elsewhere classifiable. And it means that you have a very specific diagnostic statement or diagnosis for which there is not a specific code. NOS means not otherwise specified. It means that your diagnostic statement is not specific. So two very different things. NEC, you have a very specific diagnostic statement for which there is not a code, and NOS means you have an unspecified or a vague diagnostic statement. Now, turn to page 50. And in the punctuation that we will see used includes brackets and parentheses. And let's find some. For instance, if we look at abnormal, right here it says acid-base balance, and then mixed is in parenthesis. This is a term that does not affect the assignment of the principle of the assignment of this code. So if your diagnostic statement says acid-base balance or mixed acid-base balance, the code is the same, E87.4. Brackets are used in the index to identify etiology manifestation codes, and we will talk more about these later in the lecture, but an example is in this category, in this main term, dementia. You'll notice that we have dementia with and then Lewy bodies, and there are two codes here. This is called an etiology manifestation pair. Both of these codes have to be applied to accurately code dementia with Lewy bodies, and they must be sequenced in this format. G31.83 is listed before F02.80. Both of these codes have to be used in this order. So you can see that consistently listed here under this main term, the etiology manifestation codes. In the tabular, the parentheses are used for additional information. So for instance, as we look at this example on your screen, there's an excludes note 1, meaning that if this patient has tuberculosis enteritis, you're not going to have a code from category A04. You will have a code from category A18.32. And basically, if we click on that code, it will actually take us right over to that code. And you can see parentheses used consistently throughout the tabular, enclosing that additional information. On page 51, there are terms that are called includes notes and inclusion terms, not to be confused with the excludes 1 and excludes 2 notes. But these are notes that appear immediately under a 3-character code, and they provide additional information. So for instance, let's go to if we're in this category A19, this includes tells us that included within this category is disseminated tuberculosis, generalized tuberculosis, and tuberculosis polyserositis. Inclusion terms are actually listed under some codes, and we'll see if we can find one. And these are conditions that the code is to be used for. So for instance, if we look at this code A20.8, the description of this code is other forms of plague. Included here is abortive plague, asymptomatic plague, pestis minor. So this is an example of an inclusion term. I want you to look on page 52. Look at number 14. In ICD-10, the word "and" should be interpreted to be either "and" or if it appears in the title of a code. So for instance, if we look up A18.0, tuberculosis of bones and joints. In this instance, tuberculosis of bones would be classified to this category, as well as tuberculosis of joints. So this "and" needs to be interpreted as "and or." Now we will also see the term "with." Particularly in the index. And I'll find a code that includes "with." So for instance, if we look at diabetes, diabetes is the main term, "with" is a subterm, and then each of these terms under "with" is a more specific subterm. And as you see the terms indented, they become more specific. Subterms and more specific subterms are indented 2 spaces. So you can see that the W is directly under the A. The A is under the T. That is how you know that they are subterms, and more specific subterms is by the spacing. There are times when we encounter what is called wraparound text. And this is actually when they run out of room and they wrap the text around. And in these cases, the wraparound text is indented 5 spaces. And let's see if I can find some wraparound text here for us. Of course, it depends on the font size that you're using as well, and I'm using the largest font. So for instance, if you'll look on the screen, effusion, amniotic fluid, see pregnancy complicated by premature rupture of membranes. You can see that membranes is not indented 2 spaces. It's not right under the F. It's indented 5 spaces. and it's under the S. So this is wraparound text, which is distinguished from more specific subterms by the spacing, and then also you'll notice that there is no code associated with this wraparound text. However, with our subterms and our more specific subterms, we have codes associated with those. So that's another clue as to how to differentiate between those. Now, when we're looking at with, going back to with, when we're looking at subterms, they're in alphabetical order, except for with. With is always listed right under the main term. Now, with can also be due to. So with and due to are both terms when one thing is due to another thing, one condition is due to another condition, you may either find it listed under with or you may find it listed under due to. You'll notice that due to is actually in alphabetical order right under dietary, whereas we found with that was listed right under the main term. Due to is actually alphabetical and it is a subterm. Some other instructional notes that are terms that you'll see in the alphabetical index are the terms see and see also. Now, see is mandatory, and you can see why it's mandatory. If you look at this, this subterm is loss of protective sensation, and it says C, diabetes by type with neuropathy. Well, we really don't have any choice but to see diabetes by type with neuropathy because there is no code here. So when they tell you that the C note is mandatory, it's mandatory because you don't have an option for a code here at all. You must follow that instructional note. Now, you will also see, here's another one, complicating pregnancy. C, pregnancy complicated by diabetes. Now, there are times when you will also see the term, and of course we have a bunch of C's down here. See also, and let me do this. Now, let me go. This is an example of see also. So when I come to aberrant, I have a non-essential modifier, congenital in parenthesis, and it says see also malposition congenital. Now this means that if you don't find your term listed here, you may find it listed under malposition congenital. I tell students always, when you see a see also, always go and look at it, because this may be where your most specific code will be found. So anytime you're coding and you see that see also, always click on it and go look, because that may be where you actually find the code, the most specific code. And we come upon that quite often when we're coding in these various chapters. There is also an instructional note in the tabular that says code also underlying condition. Now this instructional note doesn't give you any sequencing guidance. It just tells you if the patient has secondary hypertension that you need to also code the underlying condition. And in these instances, the reason for the admission, the definition of the principal diagnosis will take precedence, and you will apply the sequencing guidelines based on the definition of the principal diagnosis. and depending on what condition the patient came in to be treated for. Now, some other instructional notes in the tabular that I want you to be aware of are: use additional code to identify type of heart failure. When you see this instructional note, you're going to apply those codes. Use additional code to identify stage of chronic kidney disease. You are going to apply that code. And you'll see that with many of these. For instance, this is a category of hypertensive chronic kidney disease. So this is a patient who has hypertension with chronic kidney disease, and we have to apply the code not only for the hypertension but also the stage of the chronic kidney disease, and that's why you will see these instructional notes, is because you need to also apply those codes. And this is a good example of an includes note, and then an excludes one and excludes two notes as well. Remembering that excludes one means you can't have these codes on the same chart. Excludes two means that if your patient has these conditions, that you may apply those codes. This is going to conclude this lecture for Chapter 3. Your question for this lecture is to identify the difference in NEC and NOS. And in the next lecture, we'll actually be going through some of the exercises that are in the rest of this chapter. And we'll also talk more about etiology manifestation. That will conclude this lecture.